I would assume that's it. Thank you.
If I go again.
Trustees, is there any public comment tonight? Okay, so our first item is the presentation by city IT staff, and I'm going to suggest that we go around and get everybody's name who'll be part of this discussion. Why don't we start with the folks online? Is there a way to turn the light down there? It's hard to see the screen. Thank you.
Lights. Just want to make sure they can see us with the lights out.
Yeah,
Room off.
There it is.
that's better. That'll do. That's great.
See us.
So Jennifer, do you want to go first? Jennifer?
Turned on.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me zoom in. I couldn't be there in person. My name is Jennifer Douglas. I'm the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer for the City of Boulder.
Okay, and James?
Hello, everybody. I'm James Myers, the Chief Information Security Officer for the city.
Okay, great. And then why don't we start down here on this end and come down through Andy?
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm just here to show support from the Library Foundation. We're having an executive director and been following y'all and reading behind on your minutes. Dave's been keeping me up on all the progress, and it's really remarkable. You've done a year of work since May. So glad to be here in person tonight and cheer you on.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Jansanti. I am one of the Deputy Chief Information Officers for the city.
Hello, I'm Paul Williams, Network Architect.
I'm Don Mulvey. I'm the other deputy of IT for the city.
Andy Saylor, a Library Foundation board member and interested party, but also private life, a computer security and IT professional.
And I'm Johnny Teeter. I'm a trustee.
I'm Fuqua, trustee.
Sylvia Warba, trustee, member of the Library Commission, and liaison to the Library Foundation.
Hamilton, trustee.
Karen O'Brien, I'm a trustee.
My name is Jenny. I'm also a trustee.
I'm Bob McCool with Area IT, just working with the library, and consulting.
I'm Lisa Holmberg. I'm the system administrator for the library IT. And I'm Amy Shum. I'm a senior IT manager.
Kim Setter, attorney for the library district.
David, I'm the library director.
Jennifer, deputy director of the library.
And Jennifer and you online, can you hear us? We have trouble sometimes being heard.
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Take it away, city IT.
All right. Well, thanks for letting us come in here and have a conversation with you. And that's what this is a conversation. So I'm not a big PowerPoint guy. There is a lot of PowerPoints here. We'll go through them. But I just want to kind of talk that out, that this is a discussion. So what we go through here, these are not stakes in the ground, final kind of things. This is just kind of a thought, right? Let's have a discussion. So we'll go through this and happy to answer any questions along the way. So you already did introductions, so we'll go past that. So we'll kind of talk about the overall high level strategy just very bluntly, and then some of the expectations we see that's going to come from both sides for the library and for the city. Some considerations. So I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of things, and so I want to make you think a little bit. I'm going to poke some questions and hope you'll leave here thinking about some other stuff so you can make some decisions moving forward. And then closing, there's some actions we know are going to happen after this that we need to kind of get moving on if you guys want to actually get this done. All right.
Definitely want to get it.
Actually.
Right. So I think we've all kind of come to the overall strategy is a clean separation, right? So that we're two separate entities. High level, I say, it's new hardware licensing, contracts, applications. And I say that with a disclaimer, there are caveats to all of this. There's certain ones that it will have to be, there's no other choice, and there's certain ones that are negotiable, that are transferable. But that's the general plan, is we're trying to do a clean break, make sure everyone has what they need to walk away and you're fully operational, right? So that is the intent overall. Along the way, you'll see that it's ebbs and flows, and that's why the disclaimer, right? Is that there are certain things that just don't make sense, and we will walk away from that, and that's okay. So kind of talking about these expectations. So for the library, we expect that you're going to bring a consultant in. So we have Bob, so that's good. You brought one in. The library has some great staff. You have Amy, at Lisa, you have all these people. So that's good. You need those kind of people, but you're going to need some consulting help to get this stood up, right? That's the big problem, is the stand-up part is a lot of effort. It's a forklift, and then you have to support it. That's why you have staff on-prem, right? So that makes sense. So we're saying, we're expecting you to bring someone, you have. So that's great. You may need more. That's why Bob's here. Printing agreement with ISPs. So we've had some conversations about that, right? So we expect that we will give you access to the dark fiber that we're putting in place, right? All the libraries will be hooked to that. Makes total sense. That's why we put fiber in the ground, right? That's the whole intent. So we expect that you'll have access to the fiber. As for an ISP though, we expect you to have your own ISP to hook to that. Like we've already had a outreach to the Front Range Gigapop on your behalf, just to start having that conversation. So just trying to make that a little more clean for everyone. That way it's not, who do I call? Do I call this person? Do I call this person? Is it a city problem? There's one throat to choke, right? So trying to make that as clean as possible. Hardware and configuration cutover. This is going to be big on whatever you decide you want to be. When we get to future slides, you'll see what I'm talking about. But when I say hardware, that's everything, right? So that's the computer you're using, to the switch in the closet, to the servers, right? You're going to have to make some decisions on what you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. And that's your choice. Like, I can't make that for you. That's for you to make. I will advise. If you need my advice, I'll give you advice, but I cannot pick those things for you. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Contracts. So this is a very big one. You're going to have to sit down, and in some future slides, I'll talk about some of the applications that we have. There's a number of them, and you should have got them, like a list of what we see of applications the library currently uses exclusively, as well as what ones that are used in the city, right? So Workday is a perfect example. That is a city application that we use for HR system. Well, you're going to be splitting, right? So you're not taking Workday with you, right? Like, it's not going to work out that way. But something like Adobe Reader, only the library uses Adobe Reader. We have an agreement with Adobe for Adobe Reader for the public computers. That can be just given to you. That's not a big deal, right? So that's what I'm kind of talking about, is that clean contracts you're going to have to look at. The fiber runs. So in a couple of your branches, there are city fiber runs through them. So that is some of the things that we're hoping, is that if we're giving you access to the dark fiber for your use, for your sites, that we will leave our runs through there, so that we don't have to pull all that fiber out and you get to piggyback off of it. So that's kind of the idea. From our side, data. So that's a big ask. I know you guys sent over a list talking about data. This is going to be a bumpy, fun road looking at that, right? So we'll have to go through approvals, right? Talking about with CMO, with our city attorneys, talking about, hey, is this okay to go over? Is this having confidential? Does it have PII? So those are the kind of things that we're going to have to look at. So I've had some preliminary conversations, so things come over saying, hey, these are kind of things we're thinking of, and we can have that conversation. We'll probably getting approval, scanning through it to make sure we're not giving away anything that should not be transferred between companies. So.
Don, can I stop you for just a minute? I should have
Yes, ma'am.
asked you before, but do you want to take questions as you go or questions at the end? I'm asking because I have a question.
Shoot, you're fine, go ahead.
So, and Amy, I just sent you that inventory. Thanks for being here. Okay. So can you elaborate on the PII? Because PII can be a lot of things. And of course, we have both staff we're transferring and patrons.
Right.
So can you just help us understand that a little more?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for staff, that's where we get into like the HR system, right? So the HR system, we cannot do a transfer across. because we have information on each one of our staff, right? So that's their personal information, addresses, anything, their employee IDs, anything like that, that they've given us as being employees of the city. So so they will have to come out of our system as a termination and a rehire inside of the district. With that happening, I cannot give you that information because there's no guarantees you can give me that those people are your people for sure going forward, and they're trusting me with their data. So if at any point they say, hey, Paul's not going to actually go with us, well, guess what? I already gave you Paul's information. That's a breach. I just gave away his personal information, right? So HR data is probably the biggest one that we're going to have to not give, right? That's usually it, because it's just his personal information, addresses and all that he doesn't want shared. The library patron stuff, that's going to be an interesting road to cover. It should be okay. And we're going to go through the contracts on that one with attorneys and try to make sure that we're safe on that one, but that should be okay because that is an application that the library uses directly. So that should be a transferable because it's in there for library purposes.
And the
right?
library has requirements not to disclose that kind of information.
Exactly. So with that one, we're just going to have to make sure that we dot I's, cross T's on. That's probably the most sensitive one for that transfer because we know it has to go. You need that. The employee stuff from our side is stuff we won't give, right? So that's kind of where the line is.
Is that because of something that was found in employees on, or what would be breached?
Hey, John, I just want to be able to just lean in here for a minute. Anything that has to do with our employees in the city, we cannot share the information. So if you think about if an employee leaves the city and they go and work for someone else, we don't provide that information to the other company. So it would be exactly like that. So anything that has to do with our employees and our staff, David Bell, our Chief Human Resource Officer, will be working through those requirements. So as far as technology goes, we're only going to follow the guidelines that we get from our Chief Human Resource Officer and our attorney. So we cannot give any current city employees information, just like we wouldn't at any other employer. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't. So just one follow-up question. I know that when we met with Nuria last, she was talking about doing some sort of training for the employees who will be transferred around things like leave. That was the topic of discussion. Will this be something that is included in their training, that their personal information is not going to be transferred, and so they're going to have to provide that, and they're going to come up with some mechanism to capture that? Yes, David.
I met with David Bell yesterday, and I think most of the data that we need is transferable. For most of the data that we would not be able to get from the city, we could either manage in two ways. One, in the context of the offer letter, the employee would get a waiver from the city waiving any restrictions about sharing that data. But really, the new HRIS system that we're looking at, it's like first day responsibility on the job is to going in and filling out what your routing number is, who your beneficiaries are, all those, who your contact information, all that stuff that you have to do to initiate into the system anyway. So if it's not going to just transfer from Workday to Paylocity without some intervention. So what we really need, we need to know that first. I think most of the data that we need is going to be available to us.
That's great. I'm just, we're trying to make the transfer for employees as seamless as possible. So as long as they know that expectation, because we've always talked about it just as a transfer, that's great. That's mine.
One more follow-up question. So the data that's stored on the server, the 4 terabytes sitting around, is there going to be an analysis of that data regarding PII?
Yeah, there would be. We would go through and do scans on it just to make sure nothing's in there accidentally or anything like that before we do any kind of transfer. Yeah.
Just one clarification point. We do outsource our ILS, which is our integrated library system that holds all of our patron data, with another vendor. So there shouldn't be much on city servers in regards to patron information.
Yeah,
Great.
agreed.
That's great. Good. Thank you. I'll stop interrupting you now.
No, you're fine. So I said, so those are kind of the pieces there. We would be giving you your phone numbers, right? So you have a bunch of phone numbers that are in our phone system. Those would transfer over. As well as domain, right? And I'm going to talk about this a lot. So, there is a library.org domain that is inside of our tenant. But just be clear that that is what's going over, not bouldercolorado.gov, right? So there will be a separation. That means your emails, anyone emails you that .gov will not get to you, right? So that is a conversation we'll have in the slides, but that is the thing we will commit to. Yes, you will get your domain name that you have the library.org one, and you will get your phone numbers that currently ring through any library phone, okay? And then I said the dark fiber.
What is dark fiber?
So that's just fiber in the ground, backbone that's not lit up to be used for anything at this point. So we'll you'll hook to it and that'll become your backbone. So that's a simple way to say it.
Don't give me this. Dark matter.
I knew it.
All right. So we'll talk about some of the considerations that you need to start thinking about, right? So I talk about hardware. This is a big piece. We had a lot of conversations like on the computers. We'll go the simple thing first is your computers. Those are licensed to the city, right? So everything you use from the office product to the OS is licensed to the city. So the only way that these would be transferable would be to totally format them. They would be blanked out to OEM. There'd be nothing on them except for the base OS that came with the system. So there would be nothing there. It would have to be totally reimaged and added to whatever your new domain would be. So this is something to consider. This is why at the beginning I said talk about new hardware, right? Is that it would be for a transfer probably easier to have new computer set up on your new domain, ready to go. And then new employee comes in one day, you just hand them, and the other one, walk away with that hardware. That's probably the easiest way to do that. That allows you to test everything. That allows everything to pre-set up, licensing, all that can be done, and not someone coming in and trying to do it on the fly. Hopefully you get it overdone in a weekend or something like that. So that's why I say that. We have looked into this. There was some questions about warranties on these machines. Yes, they are transferable. They actually just follow the machine. They don't follow the entity. So that is something we'll have to talk more on if that is something we want to consider, because I know like for the library, you use Chromebooks, right? And that's no one else in the city uses. So that's a conversation we have to have, right? So those are things you need to consider when you're looking at this is what do you want to do? What is going to be the easiest transition for you and your staff? Is it a new piece of hardware that they can just take and they're off running? Or do we want to have a conversation about totally formatting and letting them re-image up? It can be done. I've done it all ways, but it's based on downtime.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of concerns for, and this is the easy part, right? So the next goes into some of the bigger hardware we're going to talk about, which is your network hardware, right? So you have switches, there's firewalls in there, there's Wi-Fi inside of these buildings, right? What we use is for an enterprise, right? So it makes sense. We have a lot of locations, all that. I do not know what you're going to decide to do from supporting building networks, right? There's 1,000 options out there that you can choose. Some of them can be hosted, managed, right? So it's in the cloud, the management portal, all goes there. You can control it from anywhere. That might be simpler. Our current setup, we have a controller. So you can't take the controller with you. So there is hardware there, but you won't have a central controller for it. So that makes it a lot more difficult. Doing a cutover becomes difficult, right? If I'm saying, hey, this switch stack is staying here, if same idea, we're gonna have to format them down and then you'd have to configure them and hope that works. Yes, ma'am.
A controller, is that just like that master switchboard kind of, is it like
Thinking of it like it's a virtual thing, but it's a dashboard that lets us go and say, hey, we want this configuration to change every Wi-Fi in the city. We want it to, upgrade everything, right? That's what we have.
Okay.
But like I said, that's for the whole city. So it's not something that could be transitioned because we need for the rest of the city, right? So those are things you need to consider, right? So we're currently a Cisco shop. We use all their enterprise. They have a whole, hosted platform with Meraki, right? There's 1,000 other switch kind of things out there. So that's our consideration. If you built a whole another configuration, got that all set up, it's a cutover, right? We unrack, you rack in, and it's ready to go. Allows you to test, get everything set up. So that's something you have to think about because it depends on how you're going to do support. Are you going to have all your own staff do it? Are you going to have someone third party do it? Are you going to, you want it up to a portal or on premise? So those are kind of considerations you have to have. Each have their benefits from a cost and management. So things like that you need to think about because we picked it because of how big we are. We have so many locations. It makes more sense. With 5 locations, you have a lot more options than we do because like I said, you're more nimble. Okay. So those are the kind of things you have to think about from those parts. You know, we have cell phones, all that kind of stuff. That's for you guys, you don't have as many cell phones. You have more like hotspots, things like that. Those are transferable. You'd have to have create a new account and everything can be ported over there. So that kind of hardware, no problem. Those things go with you, everything just hunky dory. But I just want you to think about those things as we're going through this, is you have to make that decision to move forward.
Real quick, as a question, I assume it's possible, and maybe this is already in the city's open data, I haven't looked, but to get things like load data for all the existing access points in the buildings and things of that variety.
Sure.
We do have some data like that, and Amy's familiar with some software that we operate to reproduce reports on a monthly basis about usage patterns at branches in Maine for Wi-Fi APs for staff and patrons and stuff like that. I think it's the patron data that's the most useful. But we do have data like that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's my understanding we're the only ones that collected
Yeah.
it at the time, so we just bought a new server for it, so I assume that's all transferable. The data is transferable.
Yeah, I would expect, yeah.
All right, so, you know, it goes into the network part of this. So I talked a little bit about the hardware. The other parts are kind of, we need to have a conversation of what's on your roof.
Yeah.
So the main library on your roof, there is a lot of hardware that is or is not yours. And so that is a conversation that has to happen, right? So that comes cameras. So that's one piece of the hardware there, but also on your roof is public Wi-Fi for the outdoors. So that is a conversation of what you want to do on the outdoors of your roof. If you want to provide, you know, outdoor Wi-Fi around the library, or not, right? And so that's something we would have to have a conversation about. And then the cameras and stuff, those are transferable across from hardware, but the server itself serves the whole city. So you would have to have, they're an open platform, so they can be used on many different platforms, being centrally managed. So you would have to have a new server and you would have to have licensing for the cameras. But the cameras themselves are there, and we'll talk a little bit when we go further how much cameras are in there. But those can stay in place.
So can I ask a question about that? So the Boulder Connect system, you can access it right now anywhere in the civic area. Is the library roof the only place from which that is being broadcast?
The only library, that is. The main library is the only one that has a connect from the roof. The other ones do not. We have it
I'm
off of other
asking about-
buildings.
I'm asking about where the Wi-Fi is actually being transmitted in the civic area.
Yeah,
Is there
there's
spots?
other locations,
Yeah.
but around the library is on the library. That's kind of what that is.
So what you're contemplating is that we're going to have a system where the library is different than everything that's around it.
Right. That's a conversation there, if you're wanting to do that or not, right, kind of thing. So,
Or is part of the proposal that you would leave your Connect Boulder system on the roof and people wanted Wi-Fi outside the building,
that's,
use the public access.
yeah, and that's for us, we're gonna have more deeper conversations on that one, because that changes a lot. Because then we're in your way, right? So there's all, you know, you're putting in all your gear, we would have to have gear to do all this, right? So anything that we have to control, like that Wi-Fi and all that, means that we'd be in the closet, right? So we would have to put in our own switches, our own routers, everything would have to be there and all ran to our stuff, right? So that takes up the room that's currently, we're doing that now, but that's because everything is ours in there. But moving forward, you would have your own stack in there. So that would now be a different expense, right? Of having to expand out, remodel, whatever it is, to be able to have yours and ours, if we were doing that. As well gets into access level, so.
Are there alternate locations from which the city could provide Connect Boulder in the civic area around the library? That's not the library?
We'd have to see.
Okay,
Like, so that,
okay.
it's a good building, right? Like I said, that library is, so that's why we have to see. But
Okay.
I just wanted to plant that seed out there, that's a consideration specifically for the main library.
Doesn't the city also have cameras on top of our building?
Yeah, we do.
So how would you just not have them anymore?
Well, that's what we're gonna talk about.
Okay, all right.
And that's what we have to consider.
Because that seems short-sighted.
Yeah, so we'll get into that as well. Data, like I said, it's not black and white. And so as you guys consider what you're gonna do for data storage, so you have things like servers, right, that have data on them. So that's just plain old file storage there. You have data in OneDrive, so personal data for each of your employees, right? So some of this is very permissioned, some of it is not, some of it's individual, some of it's, library public. I mean, it's a mixed bag. So it's not black and white. Depending on what you pick, some of this can be transferred very easily. Some of this is going to be manual, right? It's going to be an export to an external drive, a handover, and an import into a new system. So we kind of go through the storage conversation, we're going to have that consideration and understanding. So a perfect example is if you had a bunch of folders currently that your whole library staff share, and you have any security on that, it's going to be all broken because you're not our domain, you won't have our security, our users. So you'll have just raw data. So if you put that there, anyone in the library can get all that data. There's no security anymore, right? So you have to understand that and consider that. It's like, hey, I got the data, great, put it out there. Well, now it's just raw. Like you have to now go through it and secure it, right? So those are considerations you have to think about of how you're going to do that. Specifically around public data, around shared to your whole team versus personal. Personal is easy, right? It's going back into something that's only accessed by one person, right? So those are kind of things that I want you to kind of think about. It's not black and white, right? Like you're going to have to really think about it even after the transfer. Building systems, like I said, there are some questions you had on some of the different building systems from facilities. I have an ask out. I'll have to have a follow up on that. And that's on like the fire suppression, alarm systems. I'll get that data for you.
Are you including the badge swiping? And stuff
Yep,
like that?
exactly. So I have that out to facilities. So once I have that, I'll just send it over of how that, if that's transferable, what that looks like. So more to come on that piece. The cameras, that is something like I said, you'll have to consider how you want to manage those. If you want to keep them. So when we get to the camera slide, we'll talk about how much cameras and what that asset's worth, right? So more consideration things around software and applications. You may have to change what you use, right? So like I said, there's a lot of stuff we use because enterprise-wise it makes sense. A smaller amount, you can be more nimble, you can choose whatever software you want. So this goes into play in a lot of different things from whiteboarding. You can choose what whiteboard do you want to use, all the way up to what tenant do you want to be so that, what are you using? Are you using Microsoft Office or do you want to go Google, those kind of things, right? So those are conversations to kind of have, as well as standard on conferencing, right? Do you want to be Zoom? Do you want to do Teams? So those are the kind of things you get to start to think through because you're now the company, right? So we had our decision, our standard, and that's what everyone abide by. You're now your own company. You get to choose, right? And that can change that cost because you get to choose, right? Servers, all the servers you currently have are virtualized. So it's not something I can just hand to you. And so that one is going to be, each one will be different. The databases, the website stuff, easily transferable to new things. We'll go through them one by one as a team and kind of figure that out, but they are virtual. So not a piece of hardware that I can just say, hey, it's yours, go for it, right? So go ahead, Bob.
To transfer the entire server, or will that depend on
The server wouldn't transfer, it would have to be like a migration, right?
So you wouldn't provide the virtual disks or anything back to the library so we could reattach them or?
No, because it's currently on our network. It's in our domain, everything. So I would want to drop it all out. So I wouldn't want to just give it to you raw. So there's certain things like we could, like the WordPress, things like that. I mean, there's databases. We would just do a backup and a recovery and it would latch back onto the app. So I said, we'll walk through it. Some of them might make sense to do more, but most of it I think will be a reinstall onto whatever you do, cloud, hardware, whatever.
If the backup image would be acceptable if they decide they need that.
Exactly. So the tenant. So I know there was a question about, hey, we want to be on a new tenant. What's it going to take? Let's get going. So just so we're aware here, so the city is also looking at a tenant migration ourselves, in the near future, next couple of years. Even we have to hire a vendor to help us, right? This is complex. This is not something I'm not doing this for you, is what it comes down to. So you'll have to pick what you want to do and you have a choice, right? You can stay Microsoft, you can go Google, all those things. The thing that I don't know, and so because I'm not in all the conversation, is I don't know what kind of entity you're going to be. Are you a nonprofit entity, government entity? I don't know.
Government.
So that sucks.
Let's just start over.
Scratch.
I mean, literally, it's given away. It's free. I mean, just about free for most of these. Google gives it away free, almost pretty much free, I would say. Microsoft is close behind them. So that's why I said you would have more options. So that's what I was going to ask. If you're going to be nonprofit, you need to go look around because it's a lot cheaper.
That ship's not even in the water.
Right.
That's too bad.
I think we can take advantage of some education discounts though.
Yeah.
Yeah, education you can already, right? So yes, you can. So I said that was just what I want to bring up on that, and we'll talk more about this, but that tenant, when we get to that slide, it is not something we can just do whenever. So we'll talk about that. Contracts, like I said earlier, there is a tremendous amount of contracts, both for city-wide and for you particularly. Certain ones, like our Microsoft tenant, that one's gonna probably hurt us a lot. So those are three for us, or 3-year agreements. And those licenses stay with us for 3 years. So we're not gonna transfer those to you. Those would have to stay with us and we'd have to keep paying for them, even though you're gone. We're working with our vendors, see if there's any way to do a right size one time or kind of something like that. But there are certain ones like that we will have to maintain. There's others that we'll be able to transfer across, but there's a lot that we'll have to maintain on our own. So you have the list of all the applications I sent over earlier. So each one of those, we kind of have to go through one by one. And you're gonna have to say, yes, I want to keep doing this, or, hey, we're actually gonna go with a different app now. And so we can go, you do that. The ones that you're gonna keep, then we have to figure out with the lawyers, can that be transferred? That's what it comes down to. So. All right. Oh. So hardware, these are rough numbers. Amy will throw some, I'm sure, because she's better at this than I am, but kind of roughly for hardware, we were looking through network equipment, around 61 pieces of equipment are currently inside your libraries for network, about 170 computing devices. And that's, you see computing, could be a computer, could be, an iPad, things like that.
So it's like the Chromebooks then?
Yes, correct.
So does that include everything that has a City of Boulder asset tag or everything?
It is everything that has an asset tag and what we could pull from AD.
Okay, got it.
So it's, like I said, it's rough numbers. We'd have to get a little closer. Desk phones, you have only about 20 of them. A lot of you guys use the soft phone on your computer. So there's not many of those. There's about 15 printers. So that one is a conversation. I know Amy has been talking a lot with Beth on. The city is currently working on a contract to refresh all our copiers and printers. So currently we're in a month-to-month with our current copier provider. And so that's really a conversation of which way you want to go, right? It's your choice. With the current printer copier, we can do a different agreement and have that conversation with you if you want to just piggyback off that or something, but they can have a separate agreement for you. But that is, it's a good timing because we haven't signed anything and the current one's month-to-month. So it's a good time to have a conversation of what you want to do and purchase for you. Because we currently purchase our printers and copiers. You could choose to do leasing. I mean, that's your choice. Especially when you have a smaller, I don't know, what is this? It's friendly, this thing. So I said, so that's your choice. You have to figure that one out in the hopefully short term. And that way we can kind of wheel and deal and help in that one to make sure we're not buying anything. Security cameras, there's 98 of them. And I say that as Amy knows that's not all yours. Those are 98 on those buildings. The cameras can be transferred across. That's not a big deal. The ones that are on the roof that are for different things, we have stuff that points at the creek for flooding and all that kind of stuff. Those are things we have to talk about of what you're open to and all that. Since the fiber will be in those buildings, there is an option for us there. The big question that Paul and I had was kind of what is your relationship going to be with PD? Right. So right now, if we're all one city, PD has access to that so they can pull footage for us and, go looking at whatever we need them to do. If we want to share things across, not sure what your plan is to do. And so those are kind of conversations you have to think about. Because I know with PD currently, we do a lot with them on command centers when there's incidents for them to be able to pull in things like drone footage, body cam, and cameras around the city. So I don't know what relationship you guys are going to have with them on that kind of stuff for response to incidents and stuff like that. So that is a conversation to be had as well, even with PD, of what that relationship you want them to do for incidents and camera access if you want it at all. So wanted to kind of bring that one up.
What percentage of the cameras are sort of that kind of use case versus
Libraries.
90% of these are surveillance cameras within the library, which just to the relationship with the PD is we have the capacity to open it up to PD to view the internal cameras in the event of an active harmful event. So we have that capacity now. That'll be a decision that you will have to make should you want to continue with that relationship.
And then just a quick follow-up on that, because we're also drafting the license agreement that goes with the intergovernmental agreement.
Mhm.
And Kim, I know some of these things you have included in the license agreement. So as we go along, if you can kind of flag for us which ones are in the license or which ones, because I think we're also contemplating an additional agreement with IT that trails after the IGA, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yep. And we're going to need some additions to the license for some of this, once we figure out what we're doing.
And I assume at the end of this, we'll have some sort of a discussion about timing and prioritization.
Well, that's the next steps is like, okay, when do you want to talk, right? Because these
Well,
are
we've wanted to talk for some time. So
Right.
yes, the next step is when we want to talk.
right. And so as promised, the estimate, there's roughly about $500,000 in hardware assets in the libraries, which comes out to about $100,000 a year in maintenance costs is what we spend on all the hardware there. So just a rough estimate what's in there today. That's,
Percentage of 100,000 in annual maintenance is network versus.
you have that?
It feels like that would be most of it, right? Like,
It would be a chunk, yes.
Is this the estimate for, you're giving us for what we would need to spend to get the hardware that we currently have?
We're just, if you exact replacement of what you have, if you did that, that's roughly what it's worth right there. But like I said, you have a lot more different options.
So that's about 125K in network hardware and about 12,000 a year in support contracts related to networking equipment. And then the balance.
what other kinds of maintenance is there?
There's gonna be maintenance on each piece, like the security cameras have a little maintenance cost per camera. Printers have a maintenance cost. Computers have warranties, like, so they all add up piece by piece, yeah.
Are they? You have somebody come in and maintaining these cameras, is that part of it?
Yep. Yeah, that's part of it.
There's cameras inside the building. I guess we're talking about Maine here, and outside the building. Are those separate systems, the same system?
Same.
Same.
We have cameras at all of our locations except for North Boulder
Okay.
and Carnegie.
Okay.
Okay.
Smile.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to, talk a little bit. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the network kind of stuff, and then there's a part that is after this part that you get to choose, right? So there was a lot of questions about the network. There's probably 30 or 40 minutes of conversation probably could be in there. It gets really in the weeds. So I will talk about this part. And then you have an option. If you want to get in the weeds, we can. If not, you want it to be a breakout with like Bob and your team, we can do that for the weed stuff. So we'll do this and then I'll let you choose. So I said, we currently provide the whole network, Wi-Fi, internet is all in that currently there. Like I said, we want to do a separation in there, dark fiber access, and what I said, we want to completely transition. So this is not for you to really look at. It's an eye chart. So this is the reason we said we want to maintain our fibers inside of the buildings. So you can see the big circles. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles. Those are the libraries, the rest of all our locations and the fiber passing through. So this is kind of the intent of, we're trying to show you like, yeah, you're in the middle of this giant fiber jungle. Like this is why we want to offer you some strands and we want to maintain our runs, right? And conceptually, this is what we're kind of thinking for the 5 locations is giving 2 strands of fiber off the backbone, so interconnect all your locations, okay? That is kind of just generally what the network is. I've already talked a lot about we have Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. We can get into the weeds and talk about all the little configs and pieces that I know Bob was interested in. If not, like I said, we have answers that can be sent over and reviewed. So
Just one quick question on this slide. So this is the dark fiber. Is there an additional fiber cost to us in this kind of a diagram? Or is that just using the existing lines that are there?
At this point, there's not, right? And so that's an agreement we have to draft. There'd have to be an agreement between us of saying, hey, we want this, you get this, and,
Yeah.
you know, call it a day, but it has to be on paperwork.
Okay.
Now, like I said, it just depends. I mean, this is for the lawyers to talk about, not me, but kind of figure out how you guys want to do things and make coverage and, you know, SLAs, things like that, that changes things. So we'll have to have some of that in there. An example that would be around damage, right? So if our fiber, we would fix it. But if you decided that you want to put a swimming pool in next to there and you dug up our fiber, well, you're going to be on the hook for that, right? Versus if it's just general damage, right? That gets happened. So
And that probably goes both ways, right?
exactly. Yeah. So we'd have to have an agreement kind of laying that out black and white.
It's two pair and not thing.
It should be.
This would be like 2 single mode.
Yeah, exactly. While you're kind of deciding about Don's proposal about whether to go deep on the network stuff or not tonight, I can expand a little bit on that fiber network part. So like Don said, it's been our intention just internally so far that we would, the city of Boulder IT would continue to provide dark fiber connectivity between the libraries, branches, the 5 sites in Boulder, including the new Nobo branch library under construction. Perpetually. And kind of, I think the way we've talked about it, and this is not in the agreement yet so far, of course, but is that perhaps that could be nominally as an in-kind trade for some of those, that continued hosting of some network infrastructure that belongs to the city of Boulder at library facilities. So that would be the head ends for these various fiber cables, for example. The fiber cables come into the building and they enter the computer rooms, and there's a fiber termination panel in there where all the fibers become accessible and get connected to equipment. Those we envision continuing to be city assets connected to the outside fiber network, and some limited switch equipment, electronics that support like a flood camera on Bear Creek from the George Reynolds branch or something like that. You know, the city would continue to need city-owned equipment on city-operated fiber strands on these cables at GRB, for example, in order to make that image accessible, right? That camera accessible to the city network. So that's kind of a vision to date, you know, so far.
And then you would possibly maintain those pieces that are inside library buildings.
Right. And so that puts the city in the position of maintaining that outside fiber, that Boulder area fiber network, you know, for the library district and ourselves and others.
The alternative would be that we lay fiber. Like, is there another alternative?
Well, yeah, there is another alternative. I mean, you could lay fiber, you could lease fiber. I mean, you potentially could do a similar arrangement, you know, conceivably for dark fiber with a provider, or more like by other kinds of service, you know, lit service or connect.
You won't get a better deal.
You can get a better deal.
Yeah, so I just had a question. Sorry, I was raising my hand. So in one of the prior, and I think you just referred to this, where it says city intends to keep limited equipment at certain library facilities. So is it just those switches that you referenced, or are there other equipment that would fall in that category?
It depends on the conversation, like security cameras would be one of them. If there's certain cameras we want it for flood mitigation and like that, that would be part of that kind of conversation.
So just, you know, I'm not an IT person.
Yeah.
But I just have to say that from my perspective, since we have an integrated system, it seems like it makes sense from a community resilience standpoint to maintain as much of that as we can, to figure out a way to do that. So I hope that we can, you know, keep sharing this equipment and fiber and all, because that just
Would it
crazy
make
not to.
sense to lease you a certain amount, or, you know, like give you the space within the closet? Say that, you know, you get 8 square feet in a closet, or one closet for the city and we have another one. I don't know if we have the capability of multiple closets. But like,
Do you know about a closet we don't know about?
I'm just saying, like.
Hey, Don, can I just interrupt? Thank you, everybody. This has been a great conversation. One of the things that I want to just make sure that we are all aware of is that the technology team cannot negotiate any of these terms. So that's really up to the city manager's office and the city attorney. And so while we could certainly say, sure, we would love to have that, it is not up to us. We don't have the authority to negotiate any of these things. So this is just for discussion. And I just wanted to make sure that we kind of keep that in the forefront, that we actually have no ability to make any of these decisions. That's through negotiations only.
Okay, sorry. So because technology changes and all that crap, you know, I guess, like, you have a closet, you can put whatever you want in it. I think that'd probably be an easier way, right? Or something.
You say that, but you have to look at some of these libraries. There's not always space. So
Yeah, well, I assume like that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, so if I can just make a suggestion, I would suggest that we let these guys
Yeah.
talk to one another and
Right.
we can listen and learn. Andy?
So a couple of questions. One, in general, like how many strands of fiber actually go in and out of the library buildings? I don't know if it's the same everywhere. or
It's not the same everywhere, you know, because it was built, you know, in an opportunistic way over decades. And so, you know, different periods had, you know, different connectivity. But for example, the main library is connected by a 48 strand fiber cable. The George Reynolds branch is exceptional in the sense because of its geographic location. It's adjacent to multiple backbones that the city participates in. Connections from those backbones or laterals are connected into the George Reynolds branch so that there's like 3 lateral cables in there connecting to the Brand fiber network. This is a partnership we have with the Federal Labs and CU and so forth. Boulder Valley School District's backbone is connected into the George Reynolds branch, and the broadband, community broadband backbone that we're building now will have a lateral into the George Reynolds branch library. So it's really like a South Boulder cross for the city. And that's why it makes it advantageous for us to be able to continue to maintain that. And, you know, subject to what we've been talking about here, you know, continue to have the library district participating in that if we can make that possible. That's possible.
That tees up my next question, which is City of Boulder is not the only user of these strands. Like to your point, we're in the process of building a municipal network. There's various research projects, the government type stuff. Do you anticipate in the future needing to base, like, are there going to be additional parties that are going to need access to these fiber strands and the libraries to put their own equipment in for the purpose of maintaining their networks on top of what's currently dark fiber?
I don't anticipate that. No, I mean, that what I described to George Reynolds does have other agencies' traffic flowing through dark fiber, the basement of the George Reynolds Library.
But they don't have their own
They don't have
switch there or
electronics
stuff
down
like
there.
that.
No,
Okay.
they don't need regular access down there. So we just one more detail on the dark fiber thing, you know, if there's interest, what we anticipated being able to construct would be a set of dark fiber strands to connect the branch libraries in advance of tearing down connectivity that we're providing to the branch libraries now. So to your point about how many fibers are there to the various branches, there's enough that, you know, we can set up circuits in parallel with the existing ones to try to build a ring. You know, again, this is just planning stage now, to build a ring for the libraries that you could connect potentially to, you know, library district hardware and build a network that we can transition to rather than tearing down service in a sort of, you know, cut over like that, which wouldn't be a smooth one. So, you know, we thought that was going to be important to a transition.
Great. Well, you made a comment earlier, because we just have some shared things that need to go between library applications. You'd run on a separate pair for city. Right? Keep that completely physically separated.
Yep. Yeah. Vision to date is total physical separation. If there's a connection between the City of Boulder network and a library district network, it would be at the internet edge of our networks potentially.
Okay. So do we want to go a deep dive or do you want to have a separate meeting?
You know, this answered a lot of questions. I don't think a deep dive would. Most of my questions, I think could be handled.
It's not a date, it's not a speed, as I go.
So Paul has like a thing like this of answering some of your questions. So we'll send that after so you guys can review it. So.
If it factors into what decision you guys come up with, the solution that's kind of on the table, if we chose something else, there would be a significant cost both to the district and to the city for doing other than this. This suggestion is the lowest cost option for us to maintain service without loss of service, without also then forcing them to move a ton of fiber, which would be, I don't even have any idea what the cost this we would have to bear to do that. It's, yeah, so.
No, it's a win-win, obviously, yeah, on many levels, so.
And Jennifer, just so you know, one of the principles that we have been operating under with Mary and Chris in the negotiations is that we are both committed to collaborating closely even after the transition with the goal of making our service as seamless to the public as possible. So you guys have done great work in figuring out how to help us do this. My only question, being the time queen, is always the timeline. I think right now, the way the IGA is written, we contemplate a separate IT agreement that will be completed within 5 years of the transition. Yeah, so we kind of need to narrow that down. And it seems to me it would be, from our purposes, useful to have a prioritized list of what needs to happen in order to get us to January 1st, where we're transitioning people and stuff and buildings, you know, and the library patrons, and then what can tag after that. I don't know if you guys think you can do all of this in the next 4 months, but we need to have something in the IGA that sets an expectation on what the timeline is for doing this IT transition.
I think,
underneath.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
I was gonna say thank you. We certainly want to see the library succeed. We love the library and want to help as much as possible while balancing what our authority is. And from our perspective, and Don and Paul, you can certainly correct me, and I know James is on the line as well. We're really looking to you. So when will your network be up and running? Because that will dictate how quickly we can transfer. Transferring the information is not the hard part. It's you having your network set up, and that's what you have to decide to do. So our work is contingent upon when you can be set up, right? So you can't set up users in a system that doesn't exist. So I would kind of turn that around and say to your team, when can you have your network up? When will you make the decisions about what you will be developing and creating? And then we can say, this is how quickly we can transfer the information, and this is what the information is that we are allowed to transfer. So when we're looking at this, I think we're looking to you to see how quickly you can get your network up and running. Is that correct, Don?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. That's what I've been talking about, considerations. Like, you have to make a lot of decisions. Like, we can't make them for you. And so you'll have to make those decisions and figure out when you want to, you know, when you're ready to do those things. Because I can give you data, but if it doesn't have anywhere to go, then that makes no sense, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the tenant migration kind of stuff and why that's important timing, right? So, but yeah, you're right. It's absolutely right, Jennifer.
That's helpful.
It's helpful because this is helpful because we first need to know what we're gonna get, what we're not, right? So before we can tell you what we have to set up and not set up.
No, actually, it's a kind of reverse of that. It's not what you're going to get from us, it's how you want to set up your system. So as a new company, what would I need as a system? What do I need to service my staff members, whether it's from an HR perspective or payroll perspective? And then we can migrate information however, right? Whatever we're allowed to migrate. So it's not about what we can give you, it's about what you set up. And so I think we just need to be thinking of that. So we need to understand what your network configuration is going to be, what your platform is going to be. Are you going to be Google? Are you going to be Microsoft? There's all kinds of decisions. And once you make those decisions and the city attorney's office and through the negotiation says, hey, you can release all of this information, then we will give it to you in the way that you can receive it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I was talking about physical hardware versus the data, but yes.
So folks on the other side of the table, I know you guys have been thinking about this for a long time, so can you help us with this a little bit?
I can tell you what my thoughts are. We already have an RFP put together for a consultant to help us with this migration. We don't anticipate having but somebody sign a contract till October. So my feeling is we will work with the consultant until the end of the year to establish everything that we need. And that's going to take some time. If we're buying all of our hardware, we're going to probably have to go out to bid for that as well, which, as you guys know, takes time. So what I'm hoping is that we can at least have an infrastructure on paper by the first of the year. Get it stood up, and then start the transfer in 2024 is how I am hoping the timeline will go. And David, I know.
And probably 3 to 6 months after that is, I think, a reasonable estimate. So all of the stuff that we're bringing you contracts for now, like, you know, the HRIS system, all these things are going to ultimately go on our network. But the earliest that we would have things ready to begin for just the basic stuff, I mean, I think we'll have to have some of the hardware in place by January 1. As far as all of the data and the full network connectivity, like they're talking about, I think we're probably in a year from now would be not unreasonable, maybe sooner than that. And really, honestly, once we buy all the stuff, the network, the $600,000 worth of things that we're accounting for, it's just how long does it take to build it out, right? Can you plug and play? I don't know the answer to that.
And that makes sense. I think it's just that the big question is January 1st, you can have enough that we can transfer staff. We can transfer the ILS information. I mean, I think that's the critical path, isn't it?
The ILS won't be a trouble, yeah. So that's independent anyway. So what we're trying to do is build it out such that we can be able to accept the basics of the staffing component, right? So does that mean we have access to all the data and all the shared files, all that stuff? Not necessarily. And it's interesting that you bring up this question about, because I hadn't thought of that, like all of the security protocols that we've set up within Teams and all the share files are going to break. And so in some sense, how we had envisioned the migration of this data, like give us a bunch of stuff and we'll just put it in, that's not going to work. And it may be back to a lot of the stuff that we did in the last migration, which is staff are responsible for downloading their own personal data, cleaning it up along the way, so that then we can, when the network is in place, we can rebuild those security protocols prior to them entering in the data. It'll come in under your name, or my name, or Jennifer's name, or whoever else, because that would be a disaster.
I mean, is the light switch going to go out on January 1st? Or, I mean, yes, we will be a district, but does that mean that we will no longer have access to our OneDrive and SharePoint?
Well, that is a conversation for the lawyers. I cannot say, I mean, that's really the big piece, right? For us, yeah, I mean, our network is for city employees, right? And so you will no longer be a city employee. So thus, you should not be having all the computers and access to our network. I mean, that's how we do things today.
And I'd have to say, Don, from a security perspective, we wouldn't be able to allow people to have access like that. Now, there could be some form of an access point, but probably very limited, the same as what a volunteer would get. And that's why we have James Myas on, who's our chief security officer. So those would be things that we would have to really consider. We wouldn't have outside people that were not part of the staff of the city of Boulder because of security reasons. But again, I think this is a good point to bring up with Nuria and Teresa and Chris, like really have that conversation. And we're certainly happy to be engaged in the conversation about what we could and couldn't do just based on our security policies that we have today.
I do want to just point out that we do have the connected partner agreement and we do have our security officers on the city's network. I don't know if that would be a possibility for after January 1st for staff.
Let me skip past this part here. You already talked about this.
And I don't know if we have the answers to that. We certainly, that's a really good question. And one that we would have to work through with the city manager's office and our chief security officer to see what was plausible. Certainly, the other thing I just wanted to bring up, because it's not in the conversation, but I do want the library to have some awareness of this. There is an accessibility policy and law in the state of Colorado right now. So all of your documents and all of the software that you'll be using will need to have accessibility criteria. And so any of the documents that you bring over, and David, I'll be sending out some information in the next couple of weeks to all the directors. So that would be something that, you know, we would want you to be looking at as you're bringing information over. Is it accessible? So you don't get fined. So more information to come on that, but that would also be part of your responsibilities to make sure your stuff is accessible to your employees and to the community members that are reading it, and whatever the framework of the accessibility laws are in the state of Colorado.
All right. So
we have a meeting next week with Nuria and Chris to go through the IGA. And just so you know, our mutual goal to complete the IGA is middle to latter part of September,
right,
which is before your RFP is in. So I think from a negotiation standpoint, I'm thinking like a lawyer now, it would be helpful to have the question we need to pose for Nuria about this security transfer. You know, what do we need to do to make sure the lights don't go out January 1st, because they're just as dedicated as we are to getting it here. I don't know how to articulate that. Can you guys write up that question in a way that we can bring that to them and then get that conversation and collaborated on whatever? I think that would be very helpful. I'm sort of following you, but.
yeah, no, I said, and I can talk to Amy guys more about this. So, I mean, it is, what you have to realize that this is more complex. I'm trying to stay out of the weeds. As much as possible. This is more complex, right? So the city is its own entity. It has, everything is controlled by our domain, our controls, everything. So building a new business inside of it severely conflicts with that, right? So these things all are supposed to be automatically syncing together. And so you have to bring in your own domain for your computers to work. You have to bring, you know, your own phone system for your phones to work, things like that. If you use the same technology as us, guess what? They start to see each other. I mean, like, hey, why on the network is there this phone? Well, that's actually not our phone. So don't try to pull it in ours, right? So there's some complexities that I could spend hours and bore you and hate me forever. But that is my concern, right? Is it's not a thing of, hey, we're going to be in your building and have internet, is what I'm saying, right? There are things that are happening in the background that are syncing, that are connecting automatically, based on security protocols, based on just how the technology works, right? From licensing. I mean, we have a licensing server that as soon as you log in, it licenses you. Well, if you're not mine, I don't want you taking my license, right? So there's a complexity there of just doing that. And there's ways around all this, but we have to have that conversation.
Well, what's happening, January, is a legal thing.
Right.
It's not something that's going to automatically affect the network.
Right.
So like, I think the question is like, how do we make sure that the two things sync up?
Right.
We'll change the habits.
I am struggling with that exact thing. I mean, what I'm trying to get my arms around whether this, if this needs to be physically separated on January 1 for security reasons, that's a really big question that's got to get answered really fast. And I'm not sure we have the answer to it.
Right. And
because you're going to have physical access to city systems.
Right.
If this network infrastructure doesn't change. And then what changes do they need to make to ensure the city's security? And then how does that impact even your ability to log into this computer on January 1 when this happens? I mean,
there's a lot.
It's a big question. Yeah. It's very complicated. And if they have to shut things off for security reasons legally, we need to know that really, really
well. And
I mean,
this is something that we can pose to Nuria and Teresa, so that way we can have a cohesive conversation just on this piece, right? So I think what we're seeing is this is going to be a lot of friction, because January 1, to be honest, if I was leading the technology for the library right now, I would say January 1 is not doable for you guys. I mean, it's August, right? To set up a whole network I mean, unless you had an organization like Slalom come in and set everything up, I would just be very worried about that timeline of you being able to transition everything. So let me have a conversation with Nuria and Chris and Teresa, with Don and Paul, so we can frame this to them so they get some understanding, and then we can have a conversation together. And I think that would be the most useful thing that we could do. So let me take that away and I'll work on that. I'm meeting with Chris tomorrow, so I can bring that up.
Yeah, so, I mean, I work for a bunch of companies, and I've divested lots of companies, and they've always usually maintained a space on our system while they set up their own, right? Even after the transaction's completed. So I guess right now, do library employees have access to other parts of the city network?
They do, yes.
But like,
Yes, absolutely.
they can't get into your files, right?
On my personal files.
But your IT, you have like an IT drive or something like that.
We have a department drive, yes.
Yeah, and they can't get into that.
No, but we have stuff that's publicly for any employee to access, right?
Right.
And so like that, they would have access to.
But you could, is it, for this stuff that's publicly accessible, can you wall that off to them?
Well, I think, again, this conversation needs to be moved to Nuria and Chris because it's complex, right? So when somebody logs in, they get authenticated into our server. So it's complex. It's not about whether they can get into IT files. It's about when they come into our domain, they're in the domain, and that leaves a huge security risk for us. That's why we don't allow that. So this is a conversation that I think that we need to move away from tonight, because we don't have the good enough answers for you on whether we can still allow library staff to authenticate within our domain.
Right. Yeah, the big thing I wanted to, with this slide, all I was going to say is you have to start thinking about a cut. This isn't a trickle, it's a cut, right? Like that's the big thing. You're gonna have to figure out, hey, we're gonna cut over to new technology, new whatever it is, right? Because it's gonna be really hard for you to say, hey, we're on a new phone system, but we still have city phones, right? Like, so now you have two phones, how's that gonna work? There's not two jacks for, like, so you have to start thinking about this, that you cannot trickle in the technology. It's gonna be there's a cut, a point that you have to do.
Even staff's email. So like you have to have your domain set up so they have email access, right? They wouldn't come over to the city to then do email. So that's what makes it complex, right? So as Don is saying, there does need to be a cutoff. Now, we're not gonna get rid of the information that you have. We can migrate that over at any time. It's not like, oh, it's January 1 and you're never going to get your information from us. But what we're saying is about having your staff be able to authenticate to your own systems means that you have your own phone systems, they have their own email, all of those things are all wrapped up into this. You can't have two. It would just make it too complex.
And I appreciate you picking that up and taking it to Nuria, because I agree that what needs to be done. It just seems to me that we need to sort of do a triage thinking about this. There's all this complexity, but if you think about from the top, if we're transferring employees, which the city really wants, so they're out of the system, and for all sorts of reasons that makes sense. And we're transferring operations of the library on January 1st, so the city's no longer operating it. What's the minimum we need to get that done? And then from there, presumably other things we can.
Yeah, and then what can you bake into the IGA to allow sort of continued the rest of it to continue into 2024? That's baking some other trailing.
Yeah, I mean, the IGA is anticipating this additional agreement. I mean, Kim, you've done this before. Do you have anything you can add?
No, I was just talking to David about, we can always extend those deadlines in the IGA, but we can also do something similar to what we're doing with the city right now. Basically, we're paying for the library operation. They're running it. Just flip that over. We take over the operations and we lease employees from them. Or there's a lot of ways we can skin this cat, I think. I don't know the details, but what I'm hearing is we've got the legal side and we've got the technical side in between the two. One side can be flexible and one side not.
So I think your timing on talking to Chris is great, Jennifer. Just so you know, we're meeting with attorneys and Nuria and Chris next, it's the 16th.
Okay.
So if there's some ability to carry this conversation on there, I think from what I hear, this is one of maybe only 3 sticky issues in the IGA. We're pretty close to finalizing everything else, and this is probably the stickiest.
I think it's complex and it can be simple, right? So your network could be simple to start with. What you need is phone systems. You need people to be able to have email accounts. It does not have to be complex the way the cities is complex. We have a very complex system. So you could start with a very small system and then we could be migrating information over. It's really about the authentication within how somebody logs in, right? They're not going to log into the city if they're working for the library, right? So that wouldn't make sense. So I think like really looking at it in a simplistic way and being able to have an infrastructure that you can grow, right? That you start off small and you have the ability and that architecture to really grow that infrastructure as you're getting more and more ready. That's what I would suggest as a CTO, right? Start simple. Let's get email addresses up there. Let's make sure that we have full, network designs, phones. And I think you could do that in short order, but you can't do everything that we have. You'll probably never be able to do everything that we have. We're just big, right? And so you won't need that. You just need a simple plan, and then you need to be able to have that plan be able to grow with you as you're getting more mature and sophisticated in your infrastructure. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And what we're trying not to do is tell you what to do, right? Because we're not in that position. I mean, we certainly could say, here's how we think you should set up, right? Because that's what we do for a living. It's just not the position that we're in. And so we're trying to walk a delicate balance of making sure that you're okay and that you can function and serve the community. And I do think that you can do it in a simple way. My suggestion I would give you is to hire a consulting firm that has a lot of robust network infrastructure experience. We certainly have used most of the organizations in Colorado. They could come in and, set you up in quick order. So that would be my recommendation.
Any other questions or comments from this? So do we need to do anything more to facilitate next steps among you guys? It sounds like we have a next step on the IGA level, which is kind of the trustee level. You guys want to talk about how you're communicating or anything you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the next steps for Jen, and I'm in meeting with them yet tomorrow as well. And then we can kind of figure out after tomorrow kind of next steps of contracts and application, I mean, those kind of things, so you have the first piece. And I know legal put together a contract sheet as well in general. So you have absolute contracts. So that's something you can review and then internally decide if you're going to take any of that with you, right? If you can say, hey, none of this is coming, we're going to do something different, and these are the ones we want, then if that short list, let's have a conversation. I said, I'm going to start going through that.
And could we maybe schedule a follow-up time when you guys could report back to us on what you've decided or what you've learned?
Whatever you like.
So the plan is for us to discuss this and come back next week to this meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and what I would recommend is that, and I thought Chris was going to be coming tonight, but I would really recommend some of these areas that, we just don't have the ability to give you the answers that you're looking for, that we highlight those questions to Nuria and Chris and Teresa so that they can give you those answers. And then our team, our infrastructure team, is really just coming to the table on any kind of configuration or environment, those types of things. Because I really don't want my team to be in the middle of the decision making. It puts us in an uncomfortable situation because we don't have the authority. So I would love to be able to just highlight some of the things that you have questions about that we can't answer, so that I can help facilitate the answers. And then I'm happy to be with Chris and Nuria and Teresa when you're meeting, so I can translate the information if it's helpful.
That would be very helpful. I'll leave that to you guys, but I think that's a generous offer. Thank you.
I mean, to me, it sounds like we can do a lot, now to start getting the network set up for us, right, on our side, phones and whatever, hooking into this infrastructure. That we don't necessarily need the city for all of it, but there's a lot of stuff we can do on our own.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of minutia that I was asking about that I think is not, we can get to that.
To get the environment set up,
yeah.
and then she said you're not gonna delete probably, all the data on January 1st. We have to, after, migrate data.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're not, first, we're under the governance of keeping record retention for the state of Colorado, so we can't just delete things. And to be quite honest, we have to keep records on employees. So we're not going to just delete any information from the library. We might pull it over to a certain area of our network, so we have easy access to it, so we can provide it to you when you're prepared and ready. But we're definitely not going to delete the information on January 1st. That would never be our intention. I can assure you of that.
And I think I heard from you, Amy, that you're looking at sometime in October is when we can actually.
We can do it sooner than that. I think we can do it sooner than that. I mean, so, some of the hitches that the city has, we do not, and I'm not sure Amy's fully grasp all that. So that some of the processes which the city takes 2 months to do, or 20 months to do, we've done in 2 weeks. All right. So my question really for you, Bob, and for you, Don, is like, is 90 days ample time to build out a network for an organization that has 80 employees? Because I know the companies do it in a matter of a week. So is 90 days a reasonable amount of time if we hire the right firm to build out a network that we can hand off? Timekeeping, we have a few programs that are running on it, plus, what's the least amount of time you've seen it done?
Is it doable? Sure. Is it practical? No. So some of the things you guys take for granted, I guess, is like you pick up a phone and there's dial tone. That is not just you plug it in, right? I mean, there is a tremendous amount of configurations and things you have to decide on. And be very careful with. 911 is a huge one. E911, if you don't set that up, you can get in trouble and fine. So there's a lot of those little things that, you could have it up and it's running, but if someone audits you, someone calls 911, it doesn't work, you're in big trouble if it's not set up right. So there's that. The other big piece is supply chain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how long did it take us to get some switches?
Sometimes over a year. But
over a year.
Improved remarkably recently, yeah.
So it depends what products you choose. I mean, we still struggle with computer inventory. I mean, the COVID kind of supply chain hit is still happening, and it's just worse in certain areas and better in others, right? I mean, you could decide not to have phones and stay with just pure soft phones. If you did that, that changes it. You don't have to buy that hardware, right? Like, so I would say, is it doable? Sure. Is it smart to do it? No, because like I said, you're going to get yourself sideways. You're going to miss something, or you're going to have an outage or something like that because you didn't walk through the steps. That's my opinion, though.
Don, and I think that hiring a firm is the first step, right? So David, could it be done? Absolutely. Businesses start every single day, right? And it doesn't take them years to get their network up and running. And like Don said, if you could make some decisions to say, okay, we're not going to have phones, we're going to do soft phones to start with, right? So you have to have a whole architectural plan. Here's how we're going to start, and then here's where we're going to go. But I would highly advise hiring a firm to come in and lay that plan out, and then we can look at it. And we can look at it and say, hey, and poke a few holes into that and help you make some of those decisions if you have an architectural plan. But do I think it's impossible? I don't. I'm a little bit more of an optimist than Don is. Right, Don? But I think anything is doable. And you're right, David. For the city, it takes us a long time to make a decision about anything, right? The wheels just turns really slowly. So could you do it? Absolutely. You'd have to start small, and you'd have to take the most important things But I think the first step is hiring somebody to really come in and lay that plan out. And then we can look at it and say, what about this? What about this? Okay, maybe we can keep this part for you or that part. So that would be my recommendation. And I would do that in quick fashion.
Well, yeah, that, I mean, I agree with just about all that. The complexity though does have me concerned. I mean, there's a lot going on. The hardware that would have to be replaced in that short order is a lot. Right? And not, again, not impossible, but I recommend it no. Staffing has become another issue. We're vendors and dealing with distribution and vendors. Responses sometimes take a week when they used to take a day, or 2 weeks when they used to take a couple of days. We're just not getting answers back, and then trying to get you set up for a demo for Dynamics, and we're not getting the response from the people. So staffing has been a big issue. The supply chain to some, it's gotten a lot better. So I know the manufacturers that have product right now, you have to decide whether that's what you want, right? That's part of the decision, and probably go into the decision. So
There's also the process, going out to bid takes a huge amount of time versus just saying, I'm going with vendor A, and so it just is a lengthy process. I don't want to rush it because we have this timeline that the lawyers are saying we have to meet. I want to do it right. And it's nobody's fault that it's taken us this long to get to where we're at. And I think that we need to just do it right, take it slow, do it right, and work together on it.
And you have decisions that need to be made over. I mean, are you going to buy new computers, right? I mean, that's 150 new computers, network infrastructure, get it all ready for a cut. Sure, could we do it? Yeah. But it's a lot.
And all of that makes sense. And we don't want to rush you either. We just need to know. If it's not going to be January 1st, we need to know that so we can set different expectations. And so that's kind of where we're sitting at. So we'll look forward to you guys coming back next week if we've had a time to digest and talk about this some more.
Yeah, we won't have an answer on January 1 next week. We won't have that answer until we have a vendor in place. And it sounds like a lot of the issues are, one, supply chain. That's something we can't do much about. But the other is capacity, right? So right now, there are firms, large firms that can have 20 people and for the right price, right, work 70 hours a week. That's not what the expectation level is for any of city staff in any department, but that's something we could do. So we won't know until we actually hire a vendor that comes in and gives us those options. So January 1st has always been an artificial date. We constructed that. We're aiming for it. So how much do you want it, right? The city doesn't care.
That it's an artificial date, but we need a date in the RGA. So if it's not going to be January 1st, we need to change it. That's my only point.
Yeah.
And we're going to be finalizing the IGA before we have a vendor. So we're going to have to either make a choice, say, no, all right, we can't do January 1st. We're going to do some other date. And we're going to need to make that decision in the next 2 or 3 weeks to keep the IGA schedule. So I don't have a horse in that race. I don't care what it is. But we need to fish.
We could, when you say January 1st, you're talking about just the IT cutover or the whole thing?
The IGA right now is set up for
Everything.
January 1st, everything.
Everything.
And I haven't heard anything that suggests we can do a January 1st transition without a network in place.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is a way to do a January 1st transition and then trail there's certain aspects, Jennifer said, there's certain aspects of that network that just have to be there. And if we can't get it by January 1st, that becomes our target. Whatever that target is our deadline for transition. Now, I don't know if we can still move employees, that's something else you can think about, but everything sort of hinges on that piece.
That's what I was saying, could you move the employees first? And
If there is some network.
if there's something, yeah.
They have to think that through.
I don't want to belabor this, I'm sorry.
So, yeah. Well, this has been very informative. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We appreciate all your hard work on this, you guys too. And you guys are going to have so much fun.
Already.
No pressure.
So you guys meeting like weekly, or is that the plan, or from here on out, or what's? Are you meeting up with it? This is not the first time you've met with this group, right?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay.
So that's my question is there a project manager that we will work with, or is it a team? How do you envision?
Not from our perspective. I mean, as soon as you have your network design, then we can come back in and say, okay, what has been in the agreement with the city attorney's office of the files and what we can give you. We'll give you anything that they say we can. And then that will just depend. So you won't be working with our project manager. And we won't have a project manager until we even see your network design, because there's really not a lot that we can do until that happens, right? So there's nothing more that we can do except to continue to answer questions and pose questions to Nuria and Chris and make sure that they understand the technical pieces of this. But really, we're at a standstill. The technology team is at a standstill. There's not a lot that we can do.
How would you like us to address questions as we're selecting a contractor to help us with this migration? They're going to have to get up to speed on how we're integrated, and they're going to have questions about everything that we've gone over today. How do you want us to address those questions?
Once you go out to RFP and you select your vendor, we certainly will sit down with the vendor and have a technical discussion with them and share whatever question, whatever they need about how we're configured. I'm not sure how we're configured has a lot to do with how you're going to configure, but we're certainly willing to sit down with whoever you select to come in and help you design that network. At any point, we're happy to help.
Okay, so
until then, there's not a lot we can do.
Okay, would I just go through Dawn then, or?
Yeah, you can go through Dawn, and what we've been doing is making sure that Chris is also aware of any of the questions or what we're doing. So yes, you can go through Dawn, but again, there's not a lot that we can do and until you get the consultant. If you do have additional questions right now, I would prefer that they're done on a weekly basis and it's done in an order, so it's not trickling to the staff, because that's gonna make Dawn crazy and busy. So if we can get a full picture of, hey, this is this week, these are the questions that we have, we may or may not be able to answer them without knowing what your network environment's gonna be.
If you have any consultants in mind that we could invite to bid?
Absolutely. I mean, I would start with consulting group like Slalom, who's we've worked with on numerous occasions. The state of Colorado has worked with them on numerous occasions. Don works with a lot of, we probably work with every consulting firm that's in Colorado. So Don, if you want to provide a list, so that way when you do go out to the RFP, that you can at least be inviting them in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll get that to you, Amy.
Thank you.
Of course.
And Amy, talk to before we leave tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Are there assumptions that we need from the city, put in the IGA?
I think we've taken the IGA discussion as far as we can for now. I think if Jennifer talks to Nuria, and if someone can frame the questions for us so we all kind of know what we're talking about, we'll see what the discussion next week is. I think that should bring some clarity. Jennifer, if you can be there, I think that would be helpful.
I'll certainly ask Nuria if that's something that she wants me to attend. I'm happy to do that, but I'll definitely frame the questions that have come out for tonight. And I can send them. I don't know, David, if you want me to send them to you so that you can, I don't know everybody that's at the meeting.
Send them to me, Jennifer.
Okay, so that way, if I've misinterpreted anything, that you can have your eyes on that as well. There'll be 2 or 3 highlighted questions that we really need to have some answers to from Nuria and from Teresa.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else? Are we IT'd up? All right. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Should we take a 5-minute break before we? Yes. Dark matter. Dark matter, yes, I like that, dark matter. We like
It's like.
Thanks, Don. Did we bring this stuff?
I will just be sitting out here in the lobby and I'll
Okay.
clean it up when you're done.
All right.
Don't worry.
We just plug my computer in on the screen and then you can
Nope.
take your toys.
Not unless you have all those ports on your computer. Appreciate it all. Yes. Oh, I have the video for the whole people as well. So I have a video camera going in, the conference is going in, as well as.
Yeah, the last person. She said she's a lawyer.
Oh. Listen.
She can listen if she wants. To the extent that they can hear in the room.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that, all that is going through my, it's the brain running microphones and everything.
Yeah.
What do you want?
I think it's pack up and go because we managed with the computer last week.
You guys only have another, what? No, you can't, you're not strong.
Yeah, we can use that. We used it last time. Actually, last time we had board members who were there and it was terrible. So, but now they're coming. It's one more. And we'll get the recording.
So it's just.
So yeah, we can, you guys can.
Yeah.
Can I help in any way?
Here, we can put it in my, like.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Of course.
At least that part of that.
That's what.
Did they take the cans?
Oh, okay. We have, the only person we have online is Kelly.
Oh, okay.
I'm taking notes, and she'll also get the recording to do it.
Oh, okay.
Great. Chris, you're a genius. Thank you.
So, Foundation will just do your IT.
I'm sorry?
Can I have 2 seconds of debrief on that?
Please do.
So the most complicated and complex part of our network is the ILS. And it manages all of the payment transactions that the public makes to buy, pay their fines, buy for books, all these different things. None of which the city ever wanted to host because the city has a very complex mechanism as they look at doing service. We basically picked up 2 servers and drove them to the Western Soul. We were down for the time it took us to do it and brought them back up on the Western Soul and didn't miss a day of service. So it happened on a Saturday night before Sunday morning in the opening. So I agree that there's some complexity. I don't believe we need to move the dates until a vendor comes in and tells us that the supply chain is broken. I cannot buy you that amount of equipment by the time you need it, because I honestly do not believe that it's going to take 90 days to get it. Maybe 90 days to go to the absolute satisfaction of the city and for it to get their blessing and approval, but that does, we don't have to replicate what the city does on anything. We don't. It's, we have a full finance department. The library is probably not going to have it. The city has a massive HR department, a massive IT department. You're probably not going to have it. Right? We are going to try to continue, yes, we can, to be cost effective and deliver the services that we do best. And in some cases, we need to contract out for services that we don't provide. The city does everything in the house. Everything.
So my thought was employee benefits and all that's gonna be on a cloud system somewhere and not hosted by us. Payroll will probably be on a cloud system somewhere hosted by us once we get our bank account set up. And then, so we're talking email, I guess,
Microsoft
security.
365,
Yeah.
hosted by someone
Yeah.
else in the cloud.
Yeah.
Like
Teams,
document storage.
Cloud storage. All of these things are hosted in cloud.
Right.
It's not a, it really is a matter of getting it. That would get us 90% there. We can start building, we can start to build out the system.
Right. So I that's why I said, like, the employees, as long as they have something to badge in and log in and all that, it shouldn't be that. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, we can cut these, we can look at that, but that's just all the stuff that the city property that we talked about. I don't know, I mean, I have to think, I'm like, sitting here, I don't know why they would ever remove it. Connect Boulder, the wireless access downtown. We might want it for ourselves at some point in the future.
Right.
So if the city made decisions that we were unhappy with, we could open up access more broadly and not restrict certain things. What happened on the network? But the cameras and stuff like that. Who cares? We can have it.
Yeah.
Andy said we should also ask for 4 strands of cable and stuff too. It's a lot of that often itself. Just splitting the fiber and keeping that on this method. You notice they didn't ask for a dime. That's a major.
I mean, the best thing I took away from that is we aren't going to get clean answers until we guys have the network. So if you can come up with something, even what you just said, I think that answers so many of the questions. It's clear that this guy is on one wavelength and Jennifer is on another. But if we can get that and do that kind of triage.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've been saying that, like, his job is to come in and say, this is super complex, and he would just lay out all the questions that I have for you. That's his job. Yeah, I mean, that's his job, like, but, then we have to decide which of those questions we really need to answer at random.
Yeah, I mean, we'll bring the RFP back next week. You'll have a chance to look at it. We'll put it out. We have a few firms that we've already identified. Hopefully, we can give me some more. I got a couple of other ones today. We can ask for a turnaround time of 2 weeks rather than 5. We have a proposal draft, and part of the proposal should be to give us a plan for building out a submarine network infrastructure. We're all going to decide on that. Then we'll see. And then one of the questions will probably be how quickly can we do it. I think we'll get all of that because capacity is bomb wrenching is an issue for small. And you're not an issue for large. Capacity to do something like this, with everybody, things like that. We're gonna have to have a couple weeks.
Yeah, we need 3 guys.
We need guys in weeks. Yeah, and so that may change the equations.
Done. That's my contribution.
One other thing we'll ask at the next meeting, like if they maybe want to participate in the review of those bids and whether or not you might want to have a citizen on that committee.
Like to have the citizen participate.
Yeah, I think he'd be great. He's very smart. I mean, obviously, he's done a lot of stuff for me that he does it in like 2 minutes, so.
Yeah, he's just got that kind of, incisive brain, so.
I think you'll need some kind of motion. Next week.
Okay. Okay. Let's make sure that that on the agenda. So I felt like I was back on planning. Discussion. So next thing on our agenda is approval of minutes, which we are deferring until next week. So we'll do the July minutes then. So now we have the proposed amendment to the trustee bylaws. You guys, do you need discussions about this? Do you know anything about this? We're doing just 2 changes. Our bylaws as written, which we took from Douglas County, instead of trustee may be removed only following a majority vote, and then we change that to 2/3 to be consistent with other libraries. And in accordance with Colorado library law, by a majority of the appointing, our language said legislative, we wanted to take that out, so it's empty bodies, because it would be the testimony rather than others. So that's all. So is there a motion to approve the proposed bylaws amendment? We'll do the amendment to the bylaw. Okay, so we move second. 12 seconds. All those in favor? Okay. That is easy. Library district director.
So I'll keep it short. We have identified preferred candidate for the HRIS payroll system, which is meant to replace. Candidates reviewing the terms of whatever it is in the contract. I expect to have that back to you next week. Enter into the contract with the primary, so I don't know what the kind of the contract seems okay. The bid was fine. We looked at 4 companies, really narrowed it down to 2 after the initial phase, and then we were kind of well split, but I was able, thanks to Jamie and her network, contact a lot of people who have utilized and some who just recently implemented some of these systems. Some with negative points of view of both companies, some with positive points of view for both companies. And so it's really, I think, really helpful. So I went by that. And then tomorrow, the goods for the benefits broker closed on Friday. Jennifer saying and Jen and I will be doing those tomorrow. I can know it's good morning. And I mean, that's necessarily we all have one that we love the best. And so then we'll begin the process for moving into a contract with them. I suspect that we do probably the 22nd before we can get it in place. And if we can't agree on one, we'll bring the 2 top 2 as we then interview them and talk with them. But yeah, it looks really good. That is a group that we want to get on board sooner rather than later, primarily because we would like them to review our handbook, to have at least some input and how they will work with a lot of our other vendors, because they're kind of a partner for us, right? So the insurance, as you remember, is our benefits package is probably going to be between now it's $1.7 million, so it's going to be somewhere in 2 to 2.4. And they're going to be our primary point of negotiating that package. And so it's a big choice for us. The cost for them is negligible, but what we're asking them to do is a major decision for us. So,
Do you think you'll present the choice next Tuesday?
I think it'll be the 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Earlier than a month than I thought. Okay.
And for all of those, you don't think it requires action by us, or they under the door?
No, they won't.
So we have the agenda. The ITRFP and the HRIS system.
The HRIS system next to the benefits broker on the 22nd. Potentially with finance, if we don't know yet for sure. What we're gonna go with, but we'll probably have that other piece of like that. We're not gonna mention. And if we know something, it's just gonna go to the price to get others, it's gonna be up to us. I think best just to put it on the check.
Okay. And if I can, I was talking about schedule, last week, we took off the agenda, the discussion about whether we should opt out of the family thing. I suggested we put that on the agenda for the 12th of September. That will be after we reviewed our employment package and had staff comments. I wanted to make some time for us to take action and then if we do that, so we're scheduling that.
And Jennifer and I are reviewing, I'm looking at that, we got a draft back on what we saw work. And I know I was saying to Jimmy and Sam that I would get to you as soon as I got it, and it's not ready for you yet. I think there's some of the things that we just didn't get, we had to go back to, we decided. So we're trying to correct some of the things that we have not made decisions on, choices. We should be there by, Monday. We'll have it. So you guys are going to see what's the commissions. As you remember, the proposal is that we have a draft ready to go to the employees by whatever we know, either right before or right after. I also think that I'm going to have that in a month. So considering about a few office we provide we'll set up a process for everybody to get on the employee and those kind of things. That's it.
Are there any subcommittee activities?
You heard our.
Yeah, we have one other one, which is that we identified a staff chat time in September for Sam and I to attend as a kind of listening session around the benefits package, so that'll be after that Labor Day deadline. And we'll report back what we did. So we have to do this. And from a facility standpoint, we've been working with Kim on the license for the IGA. We had tentatively put an executive session on, and if you wanted to do that executive session, talk about that license, so everybody can get up to speed on that. So we'll see that for that discussion.
The two things from Tom's. One, I guess, David, you identified two city events. You wanted to know if we wanted to have a presence at them or not.
One is what's up over. So what's up over is an event that the city used to do prior to the pandemic. And brings out, 700 to 1,000 people at the prior to the pandemic. And there's just dozens and dozens of tables. And people just stop and talk about whatever. So I booked us a table before you were seated. So you have a table if you want to utilize it. Then you just need to tell me what it is that you would like to hand out. And if you want to staff the table. I'm committed to being there all day. It's for 3 hours long on a Sunday.
September 10th, 1-3:30.
Yeah, and so the table and stuff will be set up for us. I'm gonna have to go. If you want to have stuff there, just tell me if you want. The other one is Jack Literature Festival, which will be coming up September 21st, 23rd. There's a space for available tables there if you want to host one for a couple of hours. I don't think you probably want to do it for all the time, but maybe during registration. Oh, you volunteer? Okay, yeah. Well, if you guys want to be there for a table to answer any questions about the library, that would be something. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, because I wasn't. It's interesting doing both, either. Yeah, if we want to have some presence at both, then I can try to coordinate those.
So I have the what's it called? I'm not going to have that up again. I'm very manager to so I didn't do there. Yeah, I might be able to. Depending on what I want. Yeah.
All right, the funds are interested in both. They're.
What's up? You need leadership
I can. So I think Saturday morning would be the best time to do it. That's maybe the most crowds.
We can identify quickly. Maybe we can see, maybe that doesn't mean what you would like to pass out. The city is translating all of that in Spanish for us for free. And then after tomorrow, let's give it to them. Well, I can't say the email is that.
Just, I don't know what would be, like, what would that be?
Part of our budget, so ideally, we would do something in the budget, but we can't make that now and have that translate in time. We could possibly do something in the expectations we're talking about, and then in 2024, this is what we're anticipating will be coming online in 2024, 2026, maybe it'll go on enough. That was the only thing that I thought. And personally, I'd love to see us actually do something in the budget and actually pay for the translation if we need to. It's just a great time for us to be out there and getting into that. So anyway, that's my.
Yeah, so our plan, back to my report, I'm sorry. Our plan on the budget was obviously, we are planning on. So the idea was that you talked to last night about giving us some visual representation, so my, what I asked was that we would be able to bring you back something professionally in September. You choose between one of three styles, let's say, then we would put the budget into that style, in addition to just the straight spreadsheets. By your initial first reading of the budget, which we have scheduled for the end of September. So it would be perhaps ready by the, I don't think we're ready by the 10th. Certainly by the 21st. We did, I don't know about the visual representation, because, yeah, I still know. That's something that I asked our graphic designer to do for us, and she's painting it. But
you're talking about also some kind of like overview of like this is what's coming in 2024 and beyond. Yeah, does that exist already? Does something like that exist already?
Yeah, we have something like that in the thing, but not timeline attached to that.
And there's something that just touches on the ballot measures and big things.
I love that.
People can say.
What was in the original budget document? Yeah. When we can bring on the budget ballot item.
I don't want to like.
No, it's already done.
From scratch, but.
We can.
No, I think we can do it. The part that I had, visual representations, but we were planning on bringing back some samples out of knowledge of us. So you can say that I like this, or I like this, something like that. So it's hard to know exactly.
Well, what's separate those from the what's happening about the player? It's just kind of doing sort of that. What's happening? I'm sorry to backtrack. You put in the employee newsletter this week that you made a motion to become a parent affiliate. Is that, how did that go? Was there any talk about it? Did it go okay? Like, did you react positively?
I spoke to a couple staff. Okay, it's mainly the takeaway was they're listening.
Okay, well, that's good. That's very positive.
That's good, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Always found right?
Yeah.
And then see what happens next.
Okay, just want to follow.
You know, you will have some staff who review draft of the employee handbook, which includes all the benefits. I think that's what I was like to do. Okay, but there's something that I appreciate. That's why I was like to see. That was a continuation. That we've always had, so there's nobody who can to say things. But you know, we'll see what they say at the rest of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nothing negative, at least.
No.
It's just on subcommittees.
Kim, anything you want to talk to us about from your?
No, there are no action items on the legal status report and really nothing we need to address tonight. I'm gonna start reorganizing this because there's gonna be a lot more things coming on. We reviewed the leases. And what I'll try to do, instead of saying action items, I'll say something like, a date for you to look at it. And then this will start getting longer and longer, and I'll just move the things that are coming to the next meeting to the top. So you just have to read a couple of them and we'll just knock them out. That's much for us.
That sounds good. Anything left in the house?
Yeah.
Nothing. I'm gonna have. I heard you talking to somebody earlier. Maybe about something.
No, I texted, I was just texting. Kelly to see if she looked at this.
I'll probably get the signature points back next week. On this, I'm gonna do something.
Okay, I'll be in place. I'll be in.
Okay, can I go to the phone?
Yeah.
And,
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, my memory is we passed the motion saying we could be someone, so.
No, I'm gonna.
Let me know.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can probably.
I'm assuming that would be something.
Yeah, yeah.
Quick question, your analysis of HH, Kim. Thank you for doing that. And David, I can't remember if when you looked at your financial model last week, if you had a ballpark figure for how much we would be short if it passes.
I think my numbers are quite low when it passes.
Okay.
So
Okay, so you're based on it. Those numbers were based on it.
you have the option to opt out no matter what. I think the number that I'm presenting is that it passes and you don't opt out, which case we would be reduction, that reduction. And then at least there's a slight inside. Like I said, it's a great discussion, so I'm doing this. That your increase for the average Colorado household will be half as much. So in other words, it goes up by 25, or mine went up by 39. If it passes, you're gonna opt out, I think they go out there.
So I could potentially do the math. That translates to.
Yeah, the model currently fixed 12% increase next year. I think probably that's modest. If you choose to opt out, it could be significantly higher than that. And ballpark right now, based on what the city is using.
So the HH allows for an opt-out for districts, for library districts?
It does. We may have already opted out. The problem with HH is it's so complicated, just trying to figure out what it says. So I actually drafted a sentence to read to you that you can certainly opt out of the revenue. So there's a maximum amount of new revenue based upon the last year's revenue plus inflation.
Right.
That's what we could opt out of. But here's the sentence. The revenue limitation will not apply if the local government has held an election before, on, or after November 7th.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So
Before,
if
on,
they
or-
held an election at
so it's
any
like,
point,
yeah, and
that's what that means.
but the problem is then it raises a question about what it's talking about, because
Yeah.
if that's what it means,
Then it doesn't do anything.
yeah, it doesn't mean anything. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's that HH provision in the legal status report. Just leave that on there. We'll see as this shakes out. I looked through all of the state legislature's explanations and stuff. And they explain things when they get to this and they just quote the statute.
Well, that's a good
Yeah. So, yeah, the whole thing is kind of a mess, and we'll work with David too to help as much as possible to fine tune those numbers as we move forward. Because there's lots of reductions in really in the initial reduction in the valuation, which I don't think is constitutional because the Constitution says actual value. You're now saying actual value minus $10,000. There's just a bunch of little cuts like that, and it's really hard to know where you're gonna end up. But the overall purpose is to reduce the huge increases that would have been caused by inflation. So what they was finding is good of an estimate as you can get. No, commercial also. Yeah, so the commercial rate, I think, drops to 27.5 or something like that. From 29 to 27. And then the residential, you have the reduction in value, then you have the reduction in the rate. And then you have this kickback provision eventually, which we don't know what the effect of that would be. So, but as we get closer, we'll put together the best.
Because I looked at it in the past, 2024 probably wouldn't be different. 2025 would be a little bit different. That's when the assessment rates drop significantly. I just like, that's gotta be $300,000-$500,000, whatever. I probably think I did it negative. So, but that's all depends on what the rate is of, the assessment stuff. So
Yeah, times may fall on the table with adjusting the assessment rates every few years. So you make sure you just wasn't going to.
Right.
I don't know if this doesn't do the same.
Right.
It's just, so there will still be growth, just not as much growth.
Right.
That's my assumption.
You're not-
You may be right. But those adjustments.
you're right. We don't know because there's other variables. Assessments go up 100%. The rate goes down 2%. I kind of like the annual thing that they did because they kind of play with it annually based on what they're seeing.
Every time they did that, they did it for 2 years, but they changed it every year. So then you don't know what you do it again, but it'll shake out. No, there's a state. There's a state version.
Okay, anything else? All right, can we get a motion to go into executive session? Thanks for coming.
Some to our votes like spicy.
Yeah. We didn't drive the crowds. We can talk about drawing pages to our in the future.
All right, can I get the motion to executive session and then we get. Can we second? Okay, Carrie and Sam. All right. Then why don't you explain?
I gotta turn on the recording here.
Oh, yeah, turn off that one, turn on the other one.
I'll do it.
Oh, good.
Don't touch it, Kim. Maybe. Okay, meeting adjourned.